This is the 3-liter V6 OM642 diesel engine from Mercedes. And I'm going to show you today what the #1 problem is with this motor. And if you fix it and you keep on top of it, you can save yourself a lot of pain, a lot of frustration, a lot of money from a failed turbocharger. The biggest issue with this design is right here, where the turbocharger mates up to the intake tubing. You got 2 air filters on the outsides of the engine. On a Sprinter, the air filter's on top, but on all the Mercedes are on the outside. And then it feeds into the turbocharger, which is located inside the V here. Holding on the air intake to the turbocharger is a clamp and then a red gasket. That gasket looks like this. You see how it's got some ridges in it. There are a couple different shapes or styles of this gasket. Some are ribbed the whole way, some have these notches, some don't. But the issue is that every time you take this pipe off, whether you're doing a fuel filter change or you need to, fix the servo flap motor, whatever the case is, every time you take off this pipe, maybe doing air filters too, every time you take off this pipe, you need to replace this gasket, because I'm going to take this one off now. You'll see that once the gasket comes off, it no longer seals right, and you're going to develop air intake leaks all around the turbocharger. That's going to result in the mass airflow sensors not seeing the proper amount of air, which is going to result in lower power, reduced fuel efficiency, maybe even limp mode and check engine light. The second thing to worry about is right here where the CCV comes in. That too has a rubber gasket that looks like this. And again, ribbed. The problem with this location is that there's nothing else holding in that CCV. So if this gasket is worn, the CCV tube will start wiggling its way out. And then again, you'll have the turbocharger sucking in outside air past the air filters or around the air filter system, which will introduce dirty air directly to the turbocharger, but also cause, once again, the mass airflow sensors to read improperly, which will result in a lot of other problems. To take off the Y pipe, we'll want to unscrew the 2 clamps at the edges, the one at the turbo, and we'll also loosen one side of the air filters. I prefer doing the right side. Just loosen the 2 screws and wiggle it out of the way. That way you can get the Y pipe out. I prefer it does have a flathead screw on it, but I prefer using a 7mm wrench. It just won't slip off as much. Now that screw at the end of the air filter is actually a 10mm hexalobular bolt. You can use a 12-point socket. It'll beat up on the edges a little bit. So this is kind of what you want, is a special, it's like a reverse Torx or an e-Torx bolt. There's one here, and there's one right behind, it's hard to see, right there, there's a semicircular ear there. If you drop your wrench back there, you'll find it. Don't forget to disconnect the mass sensors by squeezing on them and just wiggling them out. Now you can grab the Y pipe, get it out of the way. A whole lot of oil in there. You also want to check the outside of the plastic to be sure. There'll be 4 sections of plastic. You see that's a section there, section there. They'll have the seams right there where the little tang for the gasket goes through. You want to be sure all 4 of those are intact. If one of those is broken, I see that a lot because people take these off and put them on so sloppily that they'll break the plastic. They'll just shove them back on there forcefully and they'll break the plastic. If that plastic is broken, that gasket will never seal. This one actually is in pretty good condition, but again, every time you reuse this, you increase the chances of it leaking on you. And that, again, that's your turbocharger. So anything that goes past this gasket is gonna go right into that turbo. Got a little bit of oil sitting here on top of this harness. And again, that's an indication that that O-ring or that gasket that we had here was allowing oil to drip through and onto this harness here. Below here is, you got the harness and you've got the servo motor, a bunch of stuff. And if that oil collects, it'll cause that motor to go bad. Here's that CCV gasket. You can see that those little ridges that are usually pretty good are pretty worn on this gasket. So we're gonna replace this one too. The other major source of leaks, and on this engine you can see that this pipe is leaking, is this metal pipe, the turbocharger outlet pipe, or the out pipe. Comes out of the turbocharger, the compressed air comes out of the turbocharger, comes down this pipe, and it goes down into this black silencer, down that tube, and then into the intercooler, which runs across here. It comes back down, it goes up this side and back into the engine. Anyway, there's a green O-ring in here that pops on the turbocharger, and it's very common, and I see this all the time, that green O-ring is cut. What happens is that O-ring slips off, and then when you push this pipe back on, it actually will cut the O-ring, and then you'll have this oil spray. You can see it here. See all this oil spray? That's because this is leaking, and it's spraying a little bit of oil vapor from the intake system onto all these components. So if you see that, it's a perfect sign that you've got a leak at this seal here. And again, low power, maybe an exhaust smell in the cabin, low fuel economy, maybe a check engine light for an under boost condition. These are all symptoms of that O-ring also being bad. To take the turbocharger outlet pipe off, you'll have to first take off the black plastic intake silencer. There's a bolt that's underneath it, right here, and then a bolt that's on top, right here. Take those two out first. After those two bolts are out, take out that small Torx head screw and slide this bracket out of its position. With the silencer out of the way, we can work on this post right here. This also is a E-Torx or a hexalobular style bolt. And the best thing for this is actually a hexalobular wrench. I've got a 14mm one here, and that's what you need to get this off. Now those screws out of the way, you can actually wiggle this resonator out. Then this pipe can slide out. Look at that. Prediction was right. This O-ring had broken apart. When it was reassembled, the O-ring must have been sitting not quite flush, and it got sliced. That caused all this boost leak. It also caused oil smell in the cabin, a bunch of stuff. So glad we found the problem. Now there's another O-ring you could pay attention to. This one that goes on the silencer doesn't give you as many trouble. I don't really see too many problems with it, but if you're doing it, you might as well replace it. It's a fairly thick O-ring, and again, every time this O-ring goes through a heat cycle, you take the pipe off or on, this O-ring is going to get harder. It's going to get a little more flat, and it's not going to be able to squeeze and make that seal. So, while you're here, replace that one too. Now the $1 million question that I always get asked is, how do you put this O-ring back on? Do you put it on the turbo, or do you put it inside the pipe? My method is to slide it on the turbo first. And what I like about that is this pipe, you can see it on the outside, it's got a little bit of a ridge to it. So when you slide this pipe back on, I'll try to do it with one hand here. When you push it, it's going to pop. You'll feel that O-ring seat into place. And that to me is an indication that this is on well, the O-ring is seated and sealed, and I can continue on reassembling. Once I have that green O-ring seated, I recommend you catch this post, reinstall this post now. And the reason I say that is, in order to reinstall the resonator in a second, you're gonna have to push the resonator up into this pipe. And if that post isn't in place, that pipe's gonna flop around. You're not gonna be able to reseat the resonator. All right. I can go ahead and push that up into place. Now you'll see why they use this clamp system. Because you have to push this hose back into place. And it's pretty loose in here, right? So you wanna push the hose into place and then catch it with this clamp, kind of as best you can do. May not be able to catch it on video. Let's see if I can do it. There you go. That's going to be pretty flush with that top piece there. There you go. You rotate this a little bit. Okay, so we got the clamp back in place and the securing little screw back in place. Now, these aren't really lined up, but that's okay because we can, it's all flexible, so you can hold that in place and reattach the silencer. All right, we got the silencer secured, the clamp on, screw attached, that post is back in. We know that O-ring is sealed. Now we can start replacing these gaskets. Here's the big main gasket. This isn't pretty old. It's probably a couple years old. You can already see though, just the oil accumulation on this engine is just really insane, especially here in the V. So you want to clean that out real nice. Oil out of there, that way the new O-ring seats cleanly. Got the new O-ring here. You can even tell it's thicker because it hasn't been, you know, sitting there for a long time. It's got definitely more structure to it. It hasn't been sitting in oil for so long. So if you notice, there's little alignment holes, little alignment tangs there. Just line this gasket up as best you can so that it fills into all those holes. Just kind of snap into place. You want to just go around the outside, be sure that it's pushed all the way in. When it's properly seated, those little round nubs there will be fully in to their holes. See, that one is not seated yet. So you want to be sure that you push it all the way in. That way it seats properly, and both this top square nub and the round nub are sitting where they need to be. You may need to loosen this clamp quite a bit in order to get this gasket to fit in. Now, if you're pretty happy with where all those outside nubs are, it's worth kind of taking a look inside of here. And you'll see that the hose, or the gasket, the edge of it actually sits inside of a ridge inside of this intake pipe. So when you're doing this job, before you put this whole assembly back on, be sure that that inlet gasket is actually seated on that inside ridge of the inlet pipe. Otherwise, it's just going to leak on you. And we can't forget about our new CCV grommet. No real magic here. There is a small, so I can get it in the camera, indentation there, which will line up with that little tang on the grommet. If you remember earlier in the video, I took off the 2 screws for this air filter, and that I recommended was a great way to get this pipe off. It's also vital to get it back on. So my favorite procedure, or my recommended procedure to do this, is to catch or install the CCV connection first. New grommet, it's a lot more secure in there. Catch the left air filter. Then we can focus on getting the middle, getting the turbo inlet seal on the turbo fully without fighting against the air filter at the same time. Now, a lot of times I see that people kind of give up and they don't get this pipe all the way on the turbo. This needs to go all the way on. You want this black piece to be flush, as much flush as possible with the aluminum of the turbocharger. Once you're happy with the placement of the turbo inlet pipe, you can go ahead and screw down the band clamp there. Again, I recommend a 7mm ratchet rather than a flathead screwdriver for this job. Now finally, you can pull the air filter in so that it seats right there. Reattach the 2 screws and you're done with the intake seals replacement. Again, this is the #1 cause for performance issues on this motor. So if you haven't done these and you've got some sort of performance issue before you go spending a lot of money on new turbos, new actuators, new whatever, do these 4 seals. You'll be surprised how much they help. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel. Press on the subscribe button, press on the alert button. That way you know whenever I make new videos about your Mercedes-Benzes, they'll come right to your inbox. Thanks for watching. Take care.